Hello and welcome to another edition of the Kickstarter Weekly. This week's episode is going to cover campaigns that will complete their funding between July 11th and the 17th, and I've got 3 campaigns for you this week. The first campaign is called Beyond Humanity Astrominers. They had a minimum required funding goal of $50,000. They're currently at $95,000, which is about 2 times that minimum required funding goal. Now, all 3 campaigns on this list are going to complete their funding on the same day. That is Tuesday, July the 12th. Beyond Humanity Astrominers plays 2 to 4 players in about 45 to 90 minutes. Complexity on the game is medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. Now, the reason that I'm setting the risk associated at high, because this designer and his publishing company, they've only done one other game, and that game is just being released right now. Currently. That game is called Beyond Humanity Colonies, and if you go to Board Game Geek, it says that that game was delivered in November of 2021, which is not true. Oftentimes, Board Game Geek can be inaccurate with the release of certain games. I don't think historically in the past that was true, but I think within the last couple of years, with all of the delays that have happened as a result of COVID and all of the subsequent production delays and the shipping delays, which are across many different industries, it's created such a backlog and a backup with Kickstarters delivering and even retail games delivering in some cases, that those dates don't seem to be as true anymore within the last couple of years. Sometimes there are mistakes and they don't get fixed immediately. I assume that the delivery date for Beyond Humanity Colonies will get fixed very soon because the game is now delivering, and so now they'll be able to go in there and correct it to the current month, which is July 2022, instead of the date that was in there previously, which was November 2021, which was probably when they were originally thinking that they could deliver this game, or even maybe after some of the original delay. Now, I was very excited when that first game went up on crowdfunding, Beyond Humanity Colonies, because it looked really cool to me, a very, very crunchy Euro, which is kind of my sweet spot, but it had some technology involved. Another game that has technology involved, because we're not just talking about apps, is Return to Dark Tower. With this game, they had a very cool system where there were buildings in the game that operated on some LED programming, LED displays, and also an interconnectivity between different components on the board. All of that made me a little bit wary of backing the game, especially when it was being designed by a first-time designer and put out by a first-time publisher. So even though that game looked very interesting to me, I ended up passing on it and not backing. Well, it's finally getting delivered, and another big positive is the way that the designer has been running the communication through that Kickstarter campaign. So I went over to that page because I wanted to see how is he handling that game, since that's the first game and it's only now delivering. The backers over there are very happy with the level of communication that's been happening. So that's a very good sign. I think another good sign is the fact that this game, the one we're talking about today, Beyond Humanity Astrominers, does not have that level of tech involved. So if that is something like with me that made you wary about that game, that is not involved in this game at all. And then thirdly, this is a lighter game than Colonies was. This seems to be more of a medium light game. Thematically, Beyond Humanity Astrominers is a space-themed worker placement game where you're using dice workers as the workers that you're placing. And one of the cool things about it, there are little ships, like you see in many space-themed games. In this game, they're called barge minis, and they have a flat surface on the top of them. And that is so that you can place cards, playing cards in the game, physically on top of your barge minis. And they will have spaces to place your dice and do upgrades and do actions. And I think that's really cool that the minis in the game, the space minis in the game, are able to hold cards And as you place different cards in them, right, it depends what you're getting and what you're using, the functionality of your space miniatures will be different in different games. But it just seems like a very cool component and a neat way to keep the game variable and to include that within the table presence of the game that's built in. The other thing that I should mention is that Beyond Humanity Colonies, the first game, it's getting delivered now, people are receiving it, they're starting to play it, and it currently has an 8.6 rating on Board Game Geek, which is very high. And if it's not just people who were excited about the game and rating it high before they played it, if that is a rating that actually reflects the way people are thinking about the game and enjoying the game, that is a very high rating and something that I think should speak towards the designer and this game. And again, this is going to be a simpler game mechanically, and it's not going to have that level of tech or computer integration that some people may be wary of. So I think this campaign overall is a much safer bet, and it's coming on the heels of a campaign that appears to have been handled very well, both with the communication and the delivery, even in light of the pandemic. So these are all good things, but we're still keeping that risk at high just because they've only made and delivered one game to date, and that game has only just delivered. So this game is designed by Powell Blosky-Susky, and he is the same designer as Beyond Humanity Colonies. That was his first big published game. There are 3 different artists on the game. Max Salamanowicz previously worked on Beyond Humanity Colonies. Powell Blosky-Susky, the designer, is doing some art here, and he also did some of the artwork on Beyond Humanity Colonies as well. And then finally, the third artist, Maciej Rebus, is new to the Beyond Humanity fold, so he did not work on the previous game. Instead, he's worked on such games as Among the Stars Revival, Core Worlds Empires, Star Wars Outer Rim, and Star Wars Rebellion. Finally, the publisher here is Three-Headed Monster, and their previous game was Beyond Humanity Colonies. There are 2 different pledge levels for this one. For $89, you can pledge the first class level, which will give you the collector's edition of the game, plus any stretch goals that are opened as the campaign continues. For $129, you can pledge at the Foreman level. That will add in a 5 to 6 player expansion and the Mining Unions expansion, which is a 50 card expansion that adds in corporate permissions, which is essentially goal cards. Now let's talk about add-ons, because there are a lot of add-ons for this game. In fact, this is one of those campaigns that almost seems to treat the add-ons like a merch store. So there are going to be a bunch of add-ons that aren't really about the gameplay, but they're just other things that you can buy related to the publisher. So first of all, everyone for free is going to get a booster pack for Beyond Humanity Colonies, the first game. If you don't have the first game, that's okay. Maybe you'll get it at some point in the future, but the booster pack is free and it's included. If you're not doing the Foreman pledge, if you're just doing the first class pledge, but you still want maybe one of those items, you can get them as add-ons. For $12, you can add on that Mining Unions expansion. And for $28, you can add on the 5 to 6 player expansion. For $30, you can add on a pack of 6 dice trays. For $35, you can add on a big game mat board. Also for $35, you can add on the art book. Also for $35, you can add on a deluxe poster for Beyond Humanity Astrominers. And also for $35, you can add on a deluxe poster for Beyond Humanity Colonies. For $25, you can add on a t-shirt, and there are 3 different t-shirts to choose from. And then for $35, you can add on a hoodie. For $140, you can add on a swag bag, and that is going to include one of those t-shirts, so one of those 3 t-shirts of your choice, the art book, a hoodie, and both posters, one for Astrominers, one for Colonies. Finally, for $300, you can add on the Foreman Big Mini, which is literally just this big mini. They say it's gold. I'm sure it's not gold throughout, probably has some kind of gold plating or gold finish on it, but it is a big, heavy mini. And I mean, geez, it seems like it's priced almost at the same price as the Galactus statue. So I'm assuming that shipping on this statue, if you get this, is also going to be very expensive. Now, beyond any add-ons that weigh a lot and might bring up the shipping like that Foreman Mini, continental US shipping is being estimated at $25, and Three-Headed Monster is anticipating delivering Beyond Humanity Astrominers in December of 2022, this year. Now, this is going to be a week where we're looking at a bunch of lighter games. And so Beyond Humanity, even though it's being produced by a company that previously made a heavy game in Colonies, Astrominers is now more in the medium light range, and I think it's the heaviest game on this list. So the next two games are going to be even lighter games. Actually, I say the next two games, but it's really the next 4 games, because the second campaign that I'm going to be talking about is 3 games in 1. Before we get there, though, let's talk about Globetrotting. Globetrotting also had a minimum required funding goal of $50,000. They're currently at $129,000, which is about 2.5 times that minimum required funding goal. And just like all of the campaigns that I'm talking about today, Globetrotters is going to be completing its funding on Tuesday, July 12th. Globetrotting is a game for 1 to 4 players, plays in about 30 minutes. Complexity on the game is light, and we're going to set the risk associated with that campaign at medium high. Now, the reason that I'm setting the risk for this campaign at medium high is through a company called Road to Infamy Games. They've done a few Kickstarters, but only one that's really done well. And that was for Canvas. Well, I should say 2, because they did one for Canvas and they did one for the expansion, Canvas Reflections. So they've done a few others, but nothing's taken off like Canvas and Canvas Reflections has. So I don't want to set them at high, because they have put out a game that was fairly widely distributed and is pretty well loved. But it's really just that one game. So I'd like to see them put out a few more games on that level before I lower their risk to medium low. But it's not their first time doing this. They've done this several times, and at least 2 of those campaigns, the one for Canvas and the one for Canvas Reflections, was handled very, very well. So that gets them removed from the high risk to medium high. Now, this particular game is about planning trips. In Board Game Geek, they talk about some of the mechanics being bingo and network and route building. What you're going to be doing is flipping different cards every round, and those cards will have different locations on them, and then each player will be choosing one of those locations to add to a different one of 3 trips that they'll be taking over the course of the game. They track this with a little spherical globe. So everyone has their own one, each player, and they'll be writing on this globe with kind of a dry erase marker and marking the locations that they're traveling to, kind of keeping track of it on this globe that they can move around. The actual component itself, the way that you draw on it and the way that the structure of the globe helps you draw on it, is actually pretty genius. It's a fairly simple game, though, and I think a lot of what is attractive about it is the way they're kind of using components in a new and different way, and using mechanics that are a little bit different than anything else that's out there, and pioneering a little bit of a different type of package that definitely has its share of table presence. Now, when you get down to it, they don't call it set collection on the Board Game Geek page, but you really are kind of collecting sets. It's sort of a flip and write, right? Because you're going to be flipping cards, and each player will choose one of those 3 cards each time to plug into a different leg of their trip. So players will be making different choices, and over the course of their game, their globes will look very different, and the way that they score points will be different from each other. But they're using the same data before making their choices, and it really does kind of mimic a flip and write game. And essentially what they're doing is they're collecting cities for 3 different legs of their trips, and in that sense it kind of is set collection, even though it's not listed as including set collection on Board Game Geek. So the game is designed by Jeff Chin, who designed After Nova, Canvas, and Crypt. Canvas, most gamers probably know, at least they've heard the name of it. After Nova and Crypt weren't a success on the same kind of level, so they're more unknown games. But Jeff Chin has designed all 3 of those games, and his design partner, Andrew Nerger, has also designed After Nova, Canvas, and Crypt. Globetrotting has 6 different artists in the mix, and for all of them, this is their first big published game. Some of them may have worked on one or two smaller games, but games that didn't even get the traction to have a ranking on Board Game Geek. So this list includes Gabo Durin, Luan Hun, who actually did work on a game previously, and that was Canvas. So he came with the team over from Canvas, and he is the lone artist to do that. There's also Mohammed Javadi, Nilahan Malakar, Susan Sessi, and Weiwei Zhu. And then finally, the game is being published by Road to Infamy Games, and they're best known for After-Nova, Canvas, and Crypt. Just as with Beyond Humanity Astrominers, you've got two different pledges to choose from on this one. For $53, you can pledge the retail edition, or for $68, you can pledge the limited edition. And the limited edition is going to include two extra things. There are global objectives in the game that players will be trying to complete, kind of like goal cards. And so if you pledge at the higher level, you'll get 6 more of those, 6 additional ones that are only included in the limited edition. And then you'll also get 10 travel reward cards, and these are essentially cards that give each player an asymmetric power, a variable player power, to make the game more variable and make every game a little bit different. There are 3 add-ons available, but they aren't add-ons for Globetrotting. They're just other games produced by Road to Infamy Games that you can add on and also get through this campaign. The first of those is the Canvas Deluxe Edition, and all of these are going to be the Kickstarter editions. So some of them are called Deluxe Editions, some of them are called Limited Editions, but they're all the Kickstarter editions, the nicer edition than what you'll find at retail. So for $55, you can get the Canvas Deluxe Edition, and for $40, you can get the Canvas Reflections Deluxe Edition. That was the expansion. Finally, for $35, you can get the Don't Go In There Limited Edition. Now, shipping is being estimated at $15 for the continental US, keeping in mind that if you do add on additional games, you're going to be adding on $5 shipping for every additional game. And finally, Road to Infamy Games is planning on delivering Globetrotting in April of 2023. Lastly, we move to the campaign for Joey Games, and this had a minimum required funding goal of $34,000. They're currently at $38,000, so they're funded, they've passed their funding, but they're just a little over one time. Joey Games is going to complete its funding on Tuesday, July the 12th. Now, this campaign actually features 3 different games. They're all designed by Phil Walker Harding, who a lot of gamers know, and later when I name some of the games that he's designed, you've probably either heard of him or some of his games. But he makes really, really good, really engaging, lighter games. He's also from Australia. So he and his wife have launched a new company called Joey Games, and they're trying to create games that are lighter, that are very much in his wheelhouse, but also games that are really good for teaching kids, good for families, and that put Australia front and center in some way. And you'll see how in each game as we talk about them, because they all do it in different ways in terms of theming and things like that. So 2 of the games are for 2 to 4 players, and they play in about 30 minutes. And those games are Busy Beaks and Pass the Party Food. The other game is for 1 to 99 players, plays in about 20 minutes, and that game's called Scribbly Gum. All 3 games are light, and we're setting the risk associated with this campaign at high. The reason that I'm doing that is because it is their first campaign. It's a new company. They've never run a Kickstarter before. It's very true that there is a well-known designer on board here who's created all the games, and perhaps the next time out, when they do their next campaign, we can bump them down to medium-high very quickly. But I'd like to see them get at least 1 campaign produced and delivered before we downgrade them from high. So in terms of what these games are, though, Busy Beaks is a card game. Players are essentially going to be doing a set collection, and it's a competitive game. What makes it unique to Australia is that the birds that are in the game are all Australian birds, and there's definitely a lot of flavor text in the cards and things that reflect that. Pass the Party Food similarly concentrates on Australian party food, things like lamingtons. It's tile placement instead of a card game. It's also set collection, but the difference between this one and Busy Beaks really, I think, is that this game is cooperative. So players are going to be trying to get tiles and kind of put them together in the right way, but players are all going to be cooperating to do this together, collectively. Finally, Scribbly Gum is essentially a flip and write. So you're going to have pads of paper. Everyone has their little moth on their pad of paper, and then depending on what movement tiles get flipped over, they'll get to choose how they're moving their moth through the tree. Now in Australia, when moths do this, that's how they create the markings on those gum trees. So again, this is another thing that's kind of taking Australian living and making a game about it and maybe educating the world a little bit. We've got birds, we've got Australian party food, and now we've got Scribbly Gum and the moths on the trees. There's line drawing involved because you're going to be creating lines, trying to move your moth around, and there will be achievement tiles in the game. And so part of the way you move your moth around will be trying to fulfill these various achievements. But essentially, as long as you have enough paper for people involved, it is a flip and write. So everyone's kind of going off of the tiles that are being revealed, and you can play it as many players as you have room for in the room, and you have pads of paper for them to be writing on. So as I mentioned before, Phil Walker Harding is the designer of all 3 games. Some of the games that he's best known for include Baron Park, Gizmos, Imhotep, Sushi Go, and Sushi Go Party. There are 2 artists on this project. The first is named Sarah Allen. She's working on Busy Beaks, and this appears to be her first big published game. The other artist is Meredith Walker Harding, that's Phil Walker Harding's wife. She's working on the other 2 games, Pass the Party Food and Scribbly Gum, and previously she's best known for her art on a game called Dungeon Raiders. This is being published by Joey Games, as I mentioned. It's a new company that Phil and Meredith Walker Harding have started together, and these are their first 3 games, so they have not produced anything. These are their first games. Now, not all the games are priced the same, so there are 5 different pledge levels. For $19, you can pledge Scribbly Gum by itself. For $21, you can pledge Pass the Party Food, and for $25, you can pledge Busy Beaks. A $62 pledge will get you all 3 games, and for $123, you can pledge the Super Supporters Pouch. Now that pledge level will include all 3 games, but then you'll also be getting a canvas tote bag, a hardcover picture book, an activity book, and the Joey Games Blackwood badge. Now as far as shipping goes, there are 3 different estimates in the continental US, $10, $14, and $20. $10 is for any 1 game, $14 is for all 3 games, and $20 is for that Super Supporters pouch with all 3 games and then all of the extras. Finally, Joey Games is planning on delivering all 3 of these games in December of 2022 this year. So that wraps the currently running campaigns for this week. There's 3 of them. They're all lighter games this week. If you remember in last week's video, the only game that I was profiling was called Brett Walda, and I personally did not choose to back Brett Walda, so I don't have anything this week for the pledged games section in terms of what I personally pledged. I do have 2 games that I acquired. Now, they came together because they were both from Game Brewer. The first of these is called Hippocrates, and I was really taken by this game. It's kind of a simple tile placement game. You're basically helping Hippocrates cure patients in Greece in 370 BC, but you're using the methodology of the time, which I thought could be very interesting. You know, we always play these games, there's things on the cards, there's flavor text, there's ways to combine things and do things. I thought it would be pretty interesting and entertaining to play a game where maybe the medical cure you're using is something that we know isn't going to work. Or maybe it's something that is going to work, it's just a more homeopathic way of doing it, or just a way of doing it with the medicine that they had at the time. So I thought that could make for a very fascinating, compelling theme. Now it's got contracts, it's got tile placement, and on the surface, it looked to me a little bit like another game that I backed recently called Carnegie, where you're trying to be an industrialist and also pursue philanthropic ends, much like Andrew Carnegie. The interesting thing here, though, is that the 2 designers from each of those games, so this game was designed by Alain Orban, and he's worked on Black Angel and Trois. Those are probably his 2 biggest games. I hate Twa. I really don't like Twa. And I completely passed Black Angel because I don't like Twa, and I knew that Black Angel was kind of a retheming, reimagining, redesigning of Twa with more of a space theme. They tweaked some of the mechanics, but I knew that it was similar. And I just really did not like my one and only play to date of Twa. So perhaps I need to give it a second chance at some time. But I went into both Carnegie and Hippocrates knowing that I don't like Twa. There are two designers on Twa and Black Angel. They're the same designers. One of them is Elaine Orband, who designed Hippocrates. The other is Xavier George, who worked on Carnegie. So even though I didn't like Twa, I ended up backing games by both of the designers. And to be honest, these games look very similar. The theming's very different, right? And one of them, you're trying to be an industrialist and you're also doing philanthropic things. And the other one, you're helping Hippocrates heal patients. But I don't know if the mechanics are that different on these games. So I'm very interested to get them both played, see how much crossover there is, and if one is definitely a keeper over the other one. Oh, and just for the record, Xavier George, in addition to working on Black Angel, Twa, and Carnegie, he also designed Gangopolis and Carson City. So if you're familiar with either of those games, then maybe he's a little more familiar to you through that. But both of the games appealed to me kind of in theming and what they're doing, and I think now is the time when I need to get them to the table and see if they pay off on their promise and if they can kind of each stand separately. But I'm very interested in the theme for both games, so I'm very interested to get them both to the table and see what I think about them. The other game was also a Game Brewer game. I backed them separately, but with shipping delays, yada, 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 they ended up shipping them together to save money. So the other game was Stroganov, and this one's designed by Andreas Stetting. Now, you may know him from games like Firenze, Gugong, and Hansa Teutonica. Those are some really good games. I think Hansa Teutonica is an amazing, amazing game. So this designer was actually a designer that I knew I liked from the get-go. And then the theme kind of appealed to me. It takes place in Russia, 16th century, and you're kind of expanding the Russian Empire east through Siberia. And there's a really interesting set of mechanics in how that's done. There's also amazing art in Stroganov. And so you're going to be placing these tiles and on the board, and then as your worker essentially kind of moves across the tiles that you're bringing out over a given round, that worker will be moving eastward as the tiles are placed eastward, and you're going to be doing different things on the tiles that you place, activating them, using them to hunt and get furs and do different kinds of set collection and resource management and things like that. But to me, what was so unique about Stroganov was the high level of the art, and also just this kind of pathway that was happening from left to right, from west to east, every round, and the way that you kind of place tiles and the way that that tile placement then affects the rest of your game. So those are both games I'm very excited to get to the table. I'm really looking forward to. I was very excited to back. Those are my two new acquisitions of the last week. That means that we're at the end of another video. So if you want to find out what I backed from this week, if anything, join me again next week when I'll be talking about more campaigns that are currently running that will be funding that week. And I hope to have more games played for next week's video. I'm pretty certain I'm doing 2 more scenarios in Descent, Legends of the Dark this week, and Kristen and I have a small handful of lighter games that we want to get played just to see if we want to keep them in our collection or get rid of them. And there are 1 or 2 other games I'd also like to get to the table with her soon. One of them is Fujikoro Deluxe, so I may be talking about that next week along with Descent, Legends of the Dark, and some smaller games like Lanterns, and Strawberry Sunset, and King Domino, and Sushi Go Party by Phil Walker Harding. So I hope that over the next week, you too get to play some great games. Remember to be excellent to each other. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you very soon in my next video next week. Another edition of the Kickstarter Weekly as I continue behind the scenes to get my upstairs studio ready to go and new equipment. Take care, and I'll see you soon.